The introduction from Easy Death. The living divine person is here to help everyone realize the deathless condition, by Megan Anderson. Death is a universal obligation. It does not matter what sex, race or religion we are. It does not matter how much money we have. It does not matter what we have accomplished in our lives. Death is the inevitable debt we incur the moment we are born. It can bankrupt the entire accumulation of our experience at any time. These plain facts and apparent problem of mortality have always been an essential component of Avatar Adidar's lifelong consideration and his address to humanity. In the face of the tsunami disaster on December 26, 2004, Adidar Samraj expressed his profoundly compassionate regard for the residents and tourists on the beaches of Southeast Asia for whom death arrived on the crest of a giant wave. There was no warning, no time for conscious preparation. Birth's balance was due on the spot. It was a stark human tragedy of ending on a mass scale. Given the universal nature of death and its tremendous impact on our world, you might think that the process of death would be of fundamental interest to each of us every day. You might think that death would be a reality for which we would want to account from the start, to know it, to understand it, to address it head on. However, Adidar Samraj has pointed out that most of us, especially in the modern West, and everywhere that consumer culture is proliferating, prefer to ignore death if at all possible. When we are not busy living as if death were not going to happen, we create philosophies that make us feel better about death. Though philosophical and religious beliefs offer consolations to the mind, they do not eliminate the suffering of our mortality or give us definitive knowledge of what happens after death. Adidar Samraj does not offer reassuring promises of a beautiful future for all via mere belief in his revelation. Neither does he idealize what can be achieved or experienced in a human lifetime. Throughout his life, Avatar Adidar has never been satisfied with the stock answers to death. Neither the exoteric promises of religious hope, nor the esoteric efforts of spiritual escape, nor the bleak dogma that when you're dead, you're dead. Adidar Samraj is born in and as and from the bright reality in which there is neither birth nor death. Thus his devotees know him to be the divine avatar, one who has manifested in the human world by crossing down from the deathless condition. Even as a child, he knew that truth inherently transcends the pain of loss and ending, and his entire lifetime has been spent unlocking that ultimate condition from limited views and offering a way for anyone to realize it directly, free of myth, belief, or strategy. Speaking to a group of his devotees in late 2004, Adidar Samraj directly communicated the heart's need for an answer to the question of death. He said, "There is truth, but you have to deal with death. If it does not touch death, then it has nothing to do with truth. Truth has to deal with death now, because now is a potential moment of death. A consoling belief that requires death to be some other time is not good enough religion. Religion must apply in the moment, and it must deal with death. It must be sufficient to be greater than death, far greater. It must be light rather than darkness, and it must be so now. Most perfect realization necessarily covers everything, and covers everything right now. If this is the moment of death, realization has to be sufficient to deal with it until the process gets to that point. The realization is not enough. December 21st, 2004. Megan continues. The book Easy Death, then, is not just about dying or even about preparing to die. Though there is a tremendous wisdom on those subjects between its covers, it is principally a communication of Avatar Adidar's offering of the divine realization of reality that outshines everything. He calls us to an awakening that is beyond all possible philosophies and practices relating to dying, beyond even the very fact of suffering and death. Traditional approaches to death and the dual sensitivity that transcends them. For historians, anthropologists, and other scholars, burial practices are one of the most illuminating windows into human cultures. From the spirit traps of ancient Jericho to Egyptian mummies and tombs, to cremation, to exposure, to embalming, human beings have always attributed such significance to the passage of death that they accommodated it in accordance with their ultimate beliefs about the world and the greater powers that affect us. One of the tremendous accomplishments of Avatar Adidar's life and work is his description of a comprehensive schema that accounts for all the beliefs and approaches to the human situation proposed since the earliest times. His key revelation is that all human endeavour, whether practical, religious or spiritual, is based in identification with the point of view of a specific part of the human structure, body, mind, psyche, root self essence, and so on. As he indicates, the point of view that is characteristic of an individual or a culture will determine the prevailing beliefs about death and the afterlife. There are two overarching categories of the human approach to death that help us understand the unique vantage of Avatar Adidar's wisdom. The first approach is to idealize and or attempt to eternalize, whether in the realm or in a similar world, individual human existence. This orientation is most characteristic of the religious traditions that have grown out of the West, principally Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but the same orientation is also reflected in the beliefs of many cultures throughout the world. Accommodation is made for anticipated resurrection or continued individual survival of the person in specific terms, for example, through preservation of the bodily remains or otherwise as an individual soul in a heavenly realm. Good works in life are intended to gain the favour of a deity or a plurality of deities that monitors behaviour according to divinely prescribed rules. The great power, however, conceived is fundamentally understood to be related to human existence as original creator of life and ultimate judge at death. In his essay entitled The Dual Sensitivity at the Origin of the Divine Way of Adidam, Adidar Samraj summarizes this first orientation. He says, much of religious dogma invents a future, in this world or after death, wherein all the kinds of things you hope to obtain by struggle in this life are eternalized. Some like to philosophize about this world, saying that some great event or even man-made result or effect is going to happen that will utopianize or otherwise perfect and eternalize life in this world. Some like to believe that everyone is going to be physically resurrected after death, such that life in this world will continue forever. Others like to fantasize a future beyond this world, in which exactly the same thing happens. The eternalization of the self-fulfillment one has sought in this life. from the only complete way to realize the unbroken light of real God. The following quotations from the King James Bible express the Western religious views of God as the ultimate arbiter of life and death, and of the goal of eternalization of life for those who live righteously. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me have everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death into life. John 5:24. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Romans 6:23. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God which raiseth the dead. 2 Corinthians 1:9. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Revelations 21:4. And then the following quotations are from the Quran on the same subject. Every soul will taste death, and you will be paid in full only on the day of resurrection. Whoever is kept away from the fire and admitted to the garden will have triumphed. The present world is only an illusory pleasure. The Family of Imran 3:185. It is he who gives life and death. The alternation of night and day depends on him. Will you not use your minds? From the Believers 23:80. Look then at the imprints of God's mercy, how he restores the earth to life after death. This same God is the one who will return people to life after death. He has power over all things. From the Byzantines 30:50. The second human approach to death is to escape from the patterns of suffering evident in human existence. This attitude is the most typical of Eastern cultures, exemplified by the cyclic views of rebirth in Hinduism and Buddhism, but also is shown in other mystically oriented cultures around the world. A particular human life is seen as part of a speck on an endless ocean of possibilities, and a right life is one that gains merit to provide more auspicious births in the future. The most intensive practitioners of such religions desire to escape bondage to this perpetual and helpless sequence through devotional and mystical union with the divine, asceticism and or extreme inversion away from what is perceived as the illusory world. These traditions are more apt to purify or eliminate the body after death via fire or exposure than to memorialize bodily remains. Alidar says, people are more realistic in the traditional East. In the traditional East, people do not forget to tell one another that this world is mortality land and not paradise. Therefore, the traditional wisdom message in the East is that true happiness is to be attained by seeking for that which is eternal, and therefore by strategically renouncing every kind of arrangement with what is merely temporary. The Avatin sage Ramana Maharshi describes the Eastern Hindu view of death and rebirth and the impulse to break this cycle. Ramana Maharshi says, after the death of the physical body, the mind remains inactive for some time, as in dreamless sleep, when it remains worldless and therefore bodiless. But soon it becomes active again in a new world and a new body, the astral, till it assumes another body in what is called a rebirth. But the Jnani, the self-realized man, whose mind has already ceased to act, remains unaffected by death. It has dropped, never to rise again, to cause births and deaths. The chain of illusions has snapped for him forever. The following quotes from a Tibetan Buddhist text indicate the contemplation of the reality of death, and from that contemplation the impulse to be free of all suffering. The whole point of death meditation is to urge you into the practice of Dharma, into the consideration of karma and the law of cause and effect, and how you can do something to affect your future rebirths. Thus, meditation should spur you on like a fighter being pushed into an arena. As Jedzun Milarepa said, I went to the mountains because I feared death, but now that I see the true Dharmakaya nature of my mind, even if death comes, I have no fears. Samsara means to circle, in other words, to revolve continually through the cycle of birth, sickness, old age, death, then rebirth, sickness, and so forth. Meditating on all these disadvantages of samsara, you should develop renunciation or the state of mind that wishes to be completely free of all suffering. This is the Hinayana motivation, and with it an understanding of voidness brings you liberation. When Adidas Samraj confirms the notion that there is a process that continues after this present life, what he describes altogether is an ultimate wisdom that includes and transcends both the Western and the Eastern approaches. For true liberation, there must be both the full acknowledgement of mortality and the recognition of the impulse to perfect and eternal happiness. Adidas says, I say to you, always remember that this world and conditional existence altogether is not paradise, that this is mortality land, that everyone and everything passes, and that true happiness is not about and does not require the perfecting or eternalizing of this condition or of any condition at all, and that true happiness is not itself a matter of staying here or clinging to here or leaving here, or of going or staying or leaving anywhere at all. I also say to you, always be devotionally responsive from the heart, and thus always remember that your inherent and inherently great heart disposition wants and needs and cannot in any moment, or even now, be satisfied with anything less than infinite, absolute, true, eternal happiness, or most perfect divine self-realization. I do not speak exclusively representing only one or the other of your halves, whether Eastern or Western. Rather, I speak to your native or inherent dual sensitivity, your sensitivity to what is conditionally real, and your sensitivity to what is unconditionally real. The perspective on individual and collective existence, the West, linear, utopian, apocalyptic, and the intention of religious or spiritual practice, including death rites, from the traditional Western point of view, eternalization of the human individual in this world or an afterworld. The perspective on individual and collective existence of the traditional East is cyclical, and their intention of religion is the cessation of suffering and rebirth. The perspective on individual and collective existence from Adidar's point of view is the transparent and unnecessary illusion caused by identification with what is arising, called the present activity of self-contraction. And the intention of religious or spiritual practice of Adidam, Avatar Adidar's way, is constant devotional heart response to the absolute divine reality revealed by and as Adidar Samraj. Death and dying techniques do not address the self-contraction. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross published her groundbreaking work on death and dying. She challenged the increasingly antiseptic medical views that kept death out of sight, out of mind, and even out of direct discussion while it was occurring. She opened the doors to study of both the psychology of the dying and of the experiences of death itself. A few years later, Raymond Moody published his Life After Life, coining the term near-death experience to describe commonalities discovered in research with individuals who were resuscitated out of clinical death. These and other pioneers of the modern death and dying movement fostered consciousness about the inevitable end of our lives in a secularizing world that had all but medicalized the process of dying. Today there are hundreds of books available on death and dying, approaching the topic from nearly as many different angles. Adidar Samraj acknowledges that the most popular approaches to death and dying have served greatly to improve compassionate service to others in hospitals and in terms of the possibility for in-home care. However, they, like other traditional Western approaches to dying, fall short of a transformative address to the real nature of death and to the impulse to perfect happiness. In early 1991, Avatar Adidar spoke about the recommended methods for dying that are proposed in the growing literature. He said, "The techniques recommended in popular death and dying literature these days are, in general, procedures that can be relaxing and consoling, but they do not have the ability to change your destiny after death. A presumption exists today that an individual can be enlightened or go to heaven on the basis of what he or she does during the death process. This is not true. A wide range of destinies are possible after death. A superior destiny, even to the degree of divine self-realization, requires profound spiritual practice throughout one's lifetime, and even throughout many lifetimes. Death techniques will not change your destiny, although they may relax and console you. There is no unique technique to use in the death process. You cannot go any further after death than your karma dictates, or than your lifetime of spiritual practice makes possible." Elizabeth Kubler-Ross describes common elements of near-death experience. She says, "In a near-death experience, the ones we meet are the ones we have loved the most and who preceded us in death. After we are met by those we have loved and by our own guides and guardian angels, we are passing through a symbolic transition, often described in the form of a tunnel, a river, or a gate. Each one will choose what is most symbolically appropriate for him or her. After we pass through this visually very beautiful and individually appropriate form of transition, called the tunnel, we approach a source of light that many of our patients describe and that I have myself experienced in the form of an incredibly beautiful and unforgettable life-changing experience called cosmic consciousness. In the presence of this light, which most people in our Western hemisphere call Christ or God or love or light, we are surrounded by total and absolute unconditional love, understanding and compassion. We are in the presence of this light, which is a source of pure spiritual energy and no longer physical or psychic energy. Spiritual energy can neither be manipulated nor used by human beings. It is an energy in the realm of existence where negativity is impossible. Avatar Adidar has also addressed the notion that the light, found rather universally in descriptions of near-death experiences, has significance relative to the state that an individual will permanently achieve after the death process has gone beyond the point of no return. He says, one of the popular techniques of the death and dying movement is the instruction to go into the light. The instruction to look into the light is a technique to relax people into the process of death and to help them feel better while alive. There is already a psychophysical tendency in the body-mind to have such an experience after death. However, even though this tendency exists, people do not remain in the light. Their attention inevitably returns to conditional states. Basically, the popular exercises are tidbits people take here and there from the reports of near-death experiences. On the basis of these reports, people create programs for death and techniques to help them feel more relaxed about dying. What actually occurs after death, however, they do not know, because the after-death experience is created by one's karmic tendencies and it is only affected by real spiritual practice. Mind or its absence determines where you will go. There is a tendency in the popular literature about death to think of the light as an ultimate heavenly realm. In fact, the light is more like a window in the midst of the field of perception. Going into the light is a process of ascent corresponding to the process of yogic ascent. It is not the ultimate process of sadhana. The ultimate process is not about ascent, descent, or merging into some super object such as the light. The ultimate process is about realizing the perfectly subjective divine self-condition. Instead of promising consolation through techniques, Adidar Samraj constantly brings us back to our present understanding of death. Our reaction to the fact of death is active right now, whether or not we are aware of it consciously. In and as our presumption of identification with the body as a separate self, he calls this presumption the self-contraction. And much of his teaching is devoted to a root understanding of this constant act. As a result of this presumption of separateness, we inherently behave like people who are dying. Avatar Adidar describes this activity in part 6, in a play on Kubler-Ross's famous stages of the death process. Avatar says, all the people who are living, except for those who are fully spiritually awake or profoundly and truly religious, are actually dramatizing the psychology of people who are dying. Very simply put, this is exactly what people are doing, refusing to be responsible, being oblivious in life, not wanting to deal with anything, sort of blasé. That is denial. Getting angry, reactive, this is the second stage of the process of dying. What is the search for this or that consolation? Bargaining, isn't it? There are all kinds of seeking, bargaining, and depression is a characteristic mood of people, especially when there is nothing distracting them. No new possibility, no amusement, no consolation. All this is the psychology of somebody who is dying, not somebody who is truly alive and oriented to the process of realizing the divine. Instead of being truly alive, you all have invested yourselves in the psychology of death, and you are denying the reality of death, angry about it, bargaining and seeking, depressed, every now and then relaxed and accepting a little. But then, when another impulse comes up, more denial, anger, bargaining. It is as if you are spending your life in a hospital, waiting to die from a terminal disease, which is the constriction you have placed on your own heart, your own energy, your own life, because you have devoted yourself to the self-contraction and all its results. The self-contraction is a disease. You are dying from this reaction, this effort. This is why you are dying. The self-contraction ultimately kills you bodily. All the while you are alive. You are dramatizing this psychology, this process of moving to the point of death. Whatever the cause of your death, you have invested your entire life in this contraction and its results. Megan says, what we are suffering, therefore, is more fundamental than the need for a particular technique while dying, or the promise of a brilliant future after death. As Adidar Samvar says, truth has to deal with death right now, or it is not enough. To do that, we have to address an illusion and an activity to which we are otherwise completely committed. True service to the dying and Avatar Adidar's unique gift of ego death. Adidar Samraj clearly indicates where we can go for true help. From the earliest days of his teaching, he has always pointed to the great beings throughout history who stand above the rest in terms of their realization of that which is greater than death. These are what Avatar Adidar calls adat realizers of varying degrees. In fact, such unique figures are at the heart of all the major spiritual traditions of humankind. Avatar Adidar Samraj says, people who are intolerant of spiritual masters, who think gurus are what is wrong with the spiritual way of life, are the most misled of all. Where do they think they are going to get the truth from? Books? The ego? Yourself? That is a very popular notion these days. It's within you and so forth. No, it is not. The you reference is the problem. The very thing that must be transcended. Spiritual matters are the source of the revelation of truth in human history. It does not come from any other place. It does not fall out of the sky. It comes from adat realizers. Such great beings are the true source of wisdom in the world, and thus it is they who can be of the greatest service to those who are dying. They do not merely perform rites based on beliefs about the afterlife, but have the power to literally transform the nature of our minds and bodies while alive, turning us to the ultimate reality and thereby helping to generate a different destiny after death. For instance, it is a long acknowledged tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, explicit in the famous Tibetan Book of the Dead, that for an auspicious death, a Lama must guide you in the death transition through the various experiences that will arise. Avatar Adidar's graceful help relative to the death process occurs not only through the instruction he offers, but in terms of his direct spiritual transformation of his devotee and his influence on what would otherwise be the devotee's destiny at death. Easy Death is full of stories of Avatar Adidar's blessing and regard, easing the dying individual and calling him or her to the perfect happiness that transcends death in every moment. In the relationship with him as Divine Heart Master, Avatar Adidar's devotees find a peace beyond the presumption of separate self, as expressed in this letter written by a devotee who is nearing the end of her life. I thank you so much for all your blessings throughout this process of letting the body go. I am more and more able to accept my death and am, in fact, feeling quite liberated from the stupidity of the body-mind. I constantly remember your instruction to be fearless, and I have no doubt of your love, which is what truly moves me beyond all fear. Also, beloved, you often move me beyond the body-mind to a place of bliss and joyful happiness. In that place also, the heart aches with a longing that never really ends. Avatar Adidar's help to his devotees, however, is about much more than merely blessing them with his regard at the time of their death transition. His offering is the means to actually participate in a unique process of ego transcendence, one that is free from the outset of the presumed limits of the mortal condition. That process is not about blissful distractions from the reality of death, but a kind of volunteering of the suffering self in any moment, yielding in communion with him to the present condition of truth prior to the self-contraction. In a talk entitled The Gorilla Sermon, Avatar Adidar uses a potent metaphor to communicate something of how the relationship to him generates this process. It is not through self-effort or any techniques of somehow slaying the ego. The ego cannot be relinquished through its own endeavors. Instead, he describes a process of awakening through attraction by the divine condition, revealed in the relationship with him. In the excerpt below, he has been speaking about a dream in which a gorilla, the gorilla of fear and suffering and death, is chasing you down the beach. Adidar, some of you were with me this morning looking at a book called Facing Death. How absurd, the notion of facing death. The first thing you lose in death is face. How can you face it? Everything you do to face it, everything you do to prevent the gorilla, has no ultimate effect on the gorilla. All seeking is simply your distinction, your makeup, your false face, your fascination, but zap, the gorilla gets you every time. Everybody dies. Ordinary religious people are traditional. Ordinary religious people and traditional yogis may at last manage to forget the gorilla. They may think they are looking at the blue of Krishna or the white of Jesus until they lose face. Until the sudden zero, they are looking at Krishna or Jesus. They are only consoled, only distracted. Their hoped for realization and their death are kneeling in one another. There is no philosophy whose force is stronger than the force of death. The philosophies by which people counter or react to death are in opposition, and at best only seemingly equal to the power of death. Therefore, it is possible to be consoled and distracted, but nothing greater is attained by those who react to death, who make adventure in relation to the gorilla. There is no philosophy, no vision, no attainment, no success that will make death a literal delight, that will make it any less difficult than it appears to be within the dream itself. But if you simply wake up from the dream, then because the waking state is already free of the awful that appears in dreams, you are already free of the implications of the billions upon billions of deaths that can be dreamed. One who most perfectly understands is simply one who is awake. Such a one has no other specific and necessary qualities. One who is awake is not elaborate at all. It is the guy within the dream who is very complex, because he has so many things to do. But the one who is simply awake is simply awake. I am the one who comes to awaken others. I am myself the awakening sunlight, the very light of truth. I appear within the dream of human beings as an ordinary person. I may seem extraordinary and a paradox to the dreamer, because the dreamer is very serious about all of this. But I am the one who is only awake, the one who is not serious about anything in and of itself. I do not presume the condition of the dream as limitation. Here Adidas speaks about a devotee who has just passed away. He says, he has my blessing. One night in January 1993, in the midst of a discourse, Adidas Samraj suddenly spoke about a devotee who had just passed. My devotee Barry Juris passed yesterday morning. He has my blessing. May all his karmas be purified. My Barry was a long-time devotee of mine, one of the earliest. Some of you may remember him from the earliest days. He was, by his own confession, a homosexual, and he died of AIDS. Unfortunately, he was infected with this dreadful plague, yet he always remained my devotee. Even in his last days, he remained my devotee. My devotees served him. He listened to my word and contemplated me as my devotee in his dying time. He had my word directly to him in that time. I love him, and he is all right. A devotee says, I remember one time he wrote you a card and he gave it to you himself. You told him that you valued his relationship to you, that it was special. This meant so much to him. He told me about it at the time. It was so clear to me how much he loved you then, and that he always loved you. Adidas says, he came to me in Los Angeles in the very early days. He was my devotee for 2 decades. Barry always took care to maintain his relationship to me. Therefore, he is a good sign for such a relationship to me. Because he was suffering greatly, I am glad he has passed now. It was thought that Barry might live for another week or so, but I felt it would be best if he could go quickly. He was ready. He was willing for death to occur. He had suffered enough. I am glad that he is relieved of that extraordinary distress. Devotee says, Beloved Lord, you love your devotees so much. It is a grace to see you regard your devotees in any moment of their life of practice. But it is particularly moving to see your blessing at the time of their passing. Thus, Avatar Aditar's gift is the dissolution of the problem of death itself, not a solution to it. His way is based on the understanding of the present activity that causes suffering and an attraction to him, recognized as the living agent of the deathless reality. That recognition and the ultimate realization that he awakens cuts through all seeking and suffering like a hot knife through butter. As he once described. But his way does not require escape from or cutting off the arising of life and death. Instead, the apparent individual's point of view is literally transformed in a kind of progressive ego death. Avatar Aditar Samraj says, how can you be happy at the end of your life? How can you view death as having anything to do with happiness? You feel that it must inevitably be about unhappiness, that it has to be totally terrifying. You presume that is the only possible way to have anything to do with it. If you can be happy at the end of your life, then it cannot be about something coming to an end. This is a profound and serious matter, but on the other hand, it is not merely dark. Ego death, going beyond the ego, is required. That is what it is about. It is not about ego expansion or ego development or ego evolution. It is not about ego transcendence or ego death, if you understand what that means. The phrase ego death is apt in one sense, but on the other hand it suggests that there is nothing more, that death is the end, and that is not the case. Devotee, people sometimes get confused by that. Aditar, well, you could call ego death a rebirth also. You are saying it is ego death, and you're talking about ego, so it sounds like you're talking about the death of that. Well, yes, fine. That metaphor can be used, but there are many other metaphors that could also be used. Fundamentally, it is a matter of going beyond the knot of separateness, which knot is your own activity. December the 7th, 1996. Avatar Aditar's demonstration of ultimate outshining. A number of significant events from Avatar Aditar's own life are described in this edition of Easy Death. These events are the yogic and spiritual demonstrations that underlie and prove Avatar Aditar's consummate authority to speak about the death process. As one who has actually experienced it more fully than anyone who is otherwise alive to speak of it, each shows an extraordinary new dimension of Avatar Aditar's divine investigation of mortality and his literal overcoming of it in his own body. The most extraordinary of these events is described in part 7, the occasion of yogic death that occurred when Aditar Samraj was 60 years old on a small island of the coast of the state of Washington. That event was the culminating sign of the ego-transcending process that Adidas Samraj reveals and gives to all. He calls that final demonstration divine translation, the outshining of any noticing or arising of the body and the world. Adidas Samraj has often described the mystery of divine translation through the metaphor of the body-mind as a clay pot in the furnace. He says, when you place newly made clay crocks in a furnace of great heat to dry and harden the crockery at first, at first the crocks become red hot and seem to be surrounded and pervaded by a reddish glow, but they are still defined. Eventually the fire becomes white hot and its radiation becomes so pervasive, so bright, that you can no longer make out the separate figures of the crocks. This is the significance of divine translation. At first, conditions of existence are transfigured by the inherent self-radiance of divine being. Ultimately, through self-abiding divine self-recognition of all arising forms, all forms are, in effect, outshined by that inherent self-radiance. This is the law of life. Life lived lawfully is fulfilled in outshining, or the transcending of cosmic nature. In the meantime, cosmic nature is simply divinely transfigured, and relations are divinely transfigured by the power of the divine self-position. February the 9th, 1993. Avatar Adidar is the first to describe the process of divine enlightenment that culminates in this perfect outshining. The pieces of this book that touch on Avatar Adidar's yogic demonstration verify that Avatar Adidar's entire life has been the unfolding of this demonstration of the divine conscious light. For a full account of Avatar Adidar's life, see his spiritual autobiography, The New Listening. He embraced the human condition specifically in order to show the way that becomes divine translation, and to be the human and spiritual means to draw others into that same process, whether in this lifetime or some future embodiment. As he reveals in Part 7, his experience now stands as an overwhelming testimony of the reality of deathless truth. Even while associated with a yet mortal body, he is a perfect window to the divine conscious light. It is to this destiny of brightness that Adidar Samraj calls everyone. Through his example, through his offering as spiritual master, through his blessing of all, and as his very person. He says, "What I have to say to anyone who is immediately facing death is the same as what I have to say to all. All are confronting the same situation. Life is brief and mortal, and you cannot make it not be brief and mortal. But you can change the purposes by which you live, and stop living for egoic purposes. You can become a renunciate and live a divine life." There are two things to find out. First, that psychophysical existence is mortal and inherently a form of suffering. Second, that there is the divine reality, that you can, by transcending ego bondage, receive that grace of reality and the means that flow in it, and that I am the avataric incarnation of that grace and that means. I have suffered this fear of death. I have endured its pain and gone beyond it. I have revealed the truth by dying while alive, to realize, People should come to me for my blessing, which is for the sake of divine self-revelation beyond this mortal suffering. October 24th, 2001. Avatar Adidar's compassionate sorrow and his call to the deathless condition. In 1987, on the occasion of his 48th birthday, Avatar Adidar's daughters and other children of devotees at his hermitage sanctuary in Fiji offered him a celebratory performance as a gift. In response to this occasion, Adidar Samraj was moved to show something of the mystery of the great compassionate urge that is the cause of his birth. Denise Getz, a devotee present on that night, tells the story. That evening, Avatar Adidar invited all the resident and retreatant devotees to a celebratory gathering in the Giving Coat, a large open-air building reserved for special occasions with him at the time. He sat before us, utterly magnificent and radiant. We offered him gifts, which he received with great enjoyment. His daughters and the other children began to offer him a performance of their sacred arts, including song, recitation, theatre and dance. After the children left, he began to weep and tell us of his great sorrow. The beautiful and innocent children danced and sang before him, and yet they would die. We would all die, and we would all suffer all the agonies of loss and separation. Tears streamed down his face. His sorrow seemed boundless. At first, I felt shocked by the intensity of his emotion, and then I felt drawn through his demonstration of emotion into greater sympathy with him and sensitivity to him and to the vulnerable realities that face everyone. On and on our beloved Heart Master wept. It seemed to last for hours. He freely expressed the sorrow of conditional existence, and he also freely expressed human love and relationship. And all the while he did this, he simultaneously expressed the divinity of perfect feeling. He was a sacred moment. It was a sacred moment, almost too vulnerable, too heartbroken, too broken-hearted to be viewed by mortal eyes. We were gathered close around him, drawn into his sphere of feeling. Some devotees shouted praise and love to him. Some sobbed loudly, while others sat quietly. In the midst of this chaos, he silently raised his finger to his lips to quiet us, as if asking us to be still, still enough to feel deeply with him. He began to whisper, my children, again and again, and then, I cannot love it, I just cannot love it, over and over. What, Master, can't you love? He asked. We asked him. Death, he whispered. And a few nights later, Avatar Adidar spoke about the event on his birthday, emphasizing the import of the occasion. You should understand something about the sorrow I am reflecting to you. This existence is mortal, sorrowfully so. It should be fully felt as it is. I am not here merely to remind you of your mortality, but I certainly do that. However, I am not here only to do that. I am here to help you realize the deathless reality. I would not have my children die. My children are a kind of metaphor for everyone, all the 5 billion. I would not have anyone die. This is the purpose of my submission. This is why I am here. The body will die, but even so, you can realize the deathless condition because of a profoundly compassionate response to mortality and suffering. This birth was made, and its message is not that you are mortal. That is just something of which I remind you. You must transcend yourself. I am here to help you realize the deathless condition. so that one will die. I am here so that everyone will have this opportunity to realize the deathless condition and transcend the binding force of mortality. Allow myself to let this body-mind show all of its natural signs, including a profound sensitivity to mortality. I allow myself to feel mortality completely, without the slightest reserve. I allow the body to weep, to be sundered, to be undone, to be heartbroken by utter sympathy with conditioned existence. To do so is to pass beyond sympathy by magnifying feeling itself. The heart must be broken to find what is beyond the conditional limit of the heart. Thus this great sorrow becomes joy. This heart feeling is the ultimate intensity, but you do not pass to joy without the breaking of the heart, without the breaking of the knot that separates you. Sympathy itself, feeling itself, is the means, the way, the communion. It is magnified and more through the course of the way of Adidam. And when it is utterly broken and you stand prior to it and beyond it, then you get the great vision. Then the very divine is magnified in your being, through all the fractions of the apparent universe, and you stand free. Then the body can weep all it likes, and it should. November the 10th, 1987. Megan concludes, Avatar Adidar Samraj is, even now and always, constantly magnifying the spiritual force of his divine outshining. There is no world, no suffering, no death, he affirms, in the egoless freedom of his divine self-domain. He longs to awaken beings to that perfect state. He would have everyone take advantage of the unparalleled grace of his appearance and communication of deathless truth. Whether you read this book because your heart is not satisfied with the mortal vision, or because you are confronting the reality of your own death or the passing of someone you love, ultimate help is offered here. A truly easy death, in both human and spiritual terms, is one that comes in a life of selfless heart response to the living divine person, Adidar Samraj. Da.